I would say in three to 5 years, I'd say closer to 3. I think you're going to see, I think everybody thinks, you're not going to see a regional affiliate service like Comcast here and Charter here. And you're going to see national providers. So when you're in New York City, you currently primarily have a choice of Time Warner Cable and Verizon Fios. And you could argue DirecTV and Dish too. But through a virtual MVP and these national footprints, you could pull down a list and you could have, it could have Verizon, AT&T, Dish, Comcast, and I bet you there's going to be 5 or 6 national providers, period. And they're all going to be offering IP-delivered streaming service and everything, which it's great for us. Competition for us is a fantastic thing. The monopolistic legacy of cable have definitely contributed to a lot of things in how we were marketed. Whenever, like for example, when the telcos went into, like telcos, Verizon or AT&T went into the marketplace, and what happened? How did Comcast or Time Warner Cable, whomever, what did they do when Verizon entered their marketplace? They lowered their prices, they offered better service, and they created more value. So competition is a beautiful thing. So I think 5 national providers or whatever it may be could ultimately be very good for our business. And also, I don't know if you guys read this content delivery deal. This is huge. These peering agreements are significant and will probably be the issue in the industry for the next year or so. I'll talk about that in a minute, what that means. All right, so I thought I would just throw out there the most significant implications of a Comcast Time Warner Cable merger, just so you know. First of all, HBO's revenue impact, because they're going to have a tremendous amount of leverage for us going forward, and that's going to be a challenge. Charter, I don't know if any of you guys followed the history on what happened, but Charter was supposed to buy Time Warner Cable, and that's what everybody thought was happening. And then Brian Roberts, they kind of did an end run and announced that Comcast was buying. And Charter was trying to get Comcast to go in on it with them. And then they did an end run, and Comcast ended up buying Time Warner Cable outright, or trying to, and it left Charter cold. So everybody's kind of wondering what that means for Charter. Lots of rumors about a consolidation and merger between DirecTV and Dish because they don't have broadband pipes and they need the leverage to be able to compete. Cablevision should have sold their business 3 years ago when they were wanted. Now that Comcast could potentially take over the whole marketplace, Cablevision doesn't really have anywhere else to go other than Comcast. They lost a lot of their leverage and being sold eventually. Regulatory issues, and I'll talk about this in a minute. Net neutrality and peering connection, huge, and what that means. Everybody's worried with what I said before, that now Comcast will control too much of the pipes. The broadcast cable networks, I think you're going to see a lot of consolidation in the content industry because people, I think the rumors are, they need leverage against a huge Comcast. So you're going to see people joining up. Discovery, every argument might be somewhere. I think it's going to be interesting to see kind of where they all pair up. Wireless, huge. You're going to see both. Rumors Comcast really wants to get into the wireless space. Spectrum is going to be a big deal. And I think what you're going to see Verizon and others really leveraging their LTE networks and so forth to be able to provide wireless broadband. The virtual MVPD, which I mentioned, you're going to start seeing, I think Dish is going to be the first. I think in the next 2 years you're going to see it, and that really will bring things over the top. Netflix, Amazon Prime, are they going to have the leverage that they used to have? Comcast has their own streaming service called StreamPix, and you wonder, like, now that Comcast really, even though they're only 40% of the marketplace, they've got 47 of the top 50 DMAs. They are national scale. So they're going to be able to compete in the content game. They own a content company with Netflix and Amazon Prime. So that's going to be interesting to see. Apple TV was rumored to be in a set-top box deal with Time Warner Cable, wondering what happens to them. They still trying to do that. And Google Fiber, I don't know if you guys know, but Google is letting fiber. They're in 2 markets, and shortly after the announcement, they announced that they're coming to 34 more cities. So I think they're going to jump in the game, and they could be in line to purchase a content company in the next few years. This is what I mean by the peering agreement. This is the agreement that Comcast just came to with Netflix. And if there's any engineers here, please don't challenge me. I'm going to give you all the knowledge I possibly can about this. But currently, the content is delivered through CDMs, right? And then it ends up going to, in this case, ISP Comcast, and then it gets to the end user. Netflix accused Comcast of jamming their network to slow down the Netflix experience for Comcast users, and they were putting that a lot in the press, and they were trying to influence Washington to do something about it. So Netflix and Comcast came to agreement so that they were actually going to be able to cache their content closer to the last mile, and this is what that looks like now. And so Netflix actually paid Comcast for that. And that is absolutely going to be probably, everybody's got now. Verizon wants to be paid. Everybody wants to be paid, of course. We want the same treatment that a Netflix wants, but we don't want to be paid because they already make a lot of money on our services. So that's going to be a big part of future negotiations. And I think that's kind of it. In summary, HBO loves our spot. We love where we are. We think all this digital landscape provides new distribution and revenue opportunities for us, and it's definitely going to be a brand play. I think in a world of OTT, you've got individual apps, the biggest brands are the ones that are going to be the most likely to benefit. Those that are really, and you can argue for better or for worse, the folks that are real in jeopardy are primarily, I would say, ad-supported smaller networks. That, like right now, a lot of these smaller networks are part of larger conglomerates, whether it's True TV at Turner or some of the old stuff at Viacom, and they've been leveraging their market power to get carriage to those small networks. I think you're going to see that going away. So I think the smaller ad-supported networks are going to be things are going to be very challenging for them. And I think that's my wrap. So, thank you very much.
That was fabulous, and I know that we have questions in the audience, so let's just open it up to who wants to go first. Yes, Daphne.
Could you comment on Barrio and oh, sorry. Could you comment on how you think sort of the Supreme Court and Barrio and that battle is going to play out in this?
So I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an engineer, but we are watching it very closely. But we have two different hats.
Could you just go over what that Supreme Court decision is?
Oh, so are you guys all familiar with REO and what they're doing? So REO is essentially allowing you to get, the broadcast networks IP delivered to, and you pay like $10 a month to be able to do that. And they, what is it?
It's an antenna.
Yes, an antenna, but it's a tiny little one.
Yeah.
And what they've done is they've engineered the technology in such a way that it actually gets past a lot of the requirements that would drive retransmission consent obligations from the distributors. And so they're all crying foul, right? And particularly the broadcast networks, because retransmission consent started 20 years ago, where essentially they were required to be paid for carriage of their service on these distributors. And it is what makes all the money for the broadcast networks, is the fact that these retransmission consents, it's not advertising, it's the retrans. So REO is a huge, huge threat to their business. And what REO has done smartly is they've deployed in markets where from what I understand, the circuit court would be most friendly to their businesses. And so they've been very strategic about, like, one in New York and other places, and trying to get enough distribution, if you will, that by the time they get to a market where they might be ruled against them, that they've kind of the cat's already been out of the bag. So from our perspective, I will tell you, there's a time we often get conflicted because we have a Time Warner hat and then we have an HBO hat. So Time Warner is not a big proponent of REO for lots of different reasons. With HBO, from an HBO perspective, anything that debundles the packages or breaks up the bundles that can potentially lower the buy-through to our product is a good thing. So REO has a great potential to help do that. But Turner, our sister company, doesn't want the bundles broken up because they benefit from the current packaging and ecosystem. So how that's going to play out, I don't know exactly what REO's future will be specifically, but I think if REO doesn't get any further, there's going to be somebody that comes along that gets there. I think that genie is out of the bottle, and good luck getting that back in.
Just to make a comment, it's funded by Barry Diller.
That's right.
And two, it's there's a Supreme Court case now.
Yep.
With film on it, or whatever it is, about content. So it's certainly
Absolutely. And they might get shut down, but like I said, It's an old model, old retrans, everything, it's gonna get, it will, the consumers will win eventually. I think, might take a while, but.
Okay, other questions? Yes.
There's a mic here, Christina, and just make sure the button is on.
Thank you.
With all the changes going on in the domestic marketplace, and I see that your revenues are very concentrated in the domestic marketplace, I wonder why your focus isn't more towards less competitive markets like Latin America, where I'm from, where the consumer is less sophisticated and is more still entering the stage of purchasing their first TV. And there's, much more potential to deliver content, which, by the way, is the American content, is what the Latin American market really likes.
I'm gonna I'm gonna let Bernie answer that question, and because Bernie does all of our distribution deals, digital distribution deals, she does all the international deals, and Bernie's from Ecuador, so I figured she can she has more credibility in speaking of the international market than I do.
Yeah, well, I think obviously Shelly's presentation primarily
kind of lead into
focused on the domestic revenue piece, but yes, you're absolutely right. And I think any company worth their salt right now is obviously looking at the international markets with huge potential. I think the interesting piece though about the international market though is that it's fragmented. And so even when you talk about, for example, Latin America, you are then also need to break it down into kind of a regional country by country. So we actually have a tremendous presence worldwide. You're from Latin America, I am too. I grew up with HBO, meaning the brand of HBO is tremendously meaningful in some of the international territories exactly because of what we said. We were probably one of the first and only premium networks in some of these territories for a very, very long time. So the counter to that is, we always look at there's tremendous potential there. We've started to make a lot of our ventures internationally used to be joint ventures. We've started to buy back some of that in order to kind of wholly operate and own them. So there's a very aggressive international push. The complicated part about the international markets, though, back to you said it, is the level of sophistication, and not just of the consumer, but of the infrastructure. And so, we talk about HBO Go and how fantastic this digital IP delivered revolution. In some of the international markets, I think that Eastern Europe and Asia are very interesting because from a wireless and broadband infrastructure standpoint, there's actually the goods to support advanced services. Latin America, I always find, is a very interesting one because there's tremendous potential. It's huge. It's an entry point because consumers aren't quite there yet. But then you look at kind of the economics, devaluation. I mean, it's a tough market it's a tough market that's not consistent. And then I think the infrastructure piece is obviously one of the other pieces, right? Broadband, for example, in the Latin American markets is really limited to those who can actually afford, and that's a subsegment of the entire population. So not to get into the weeds, but all to say that it excites us to think about the international markets. Like Shelly said, we actually have completed deals with Microsoft and Samsung and Apple, because those are also players that are equally just as interested in kind of getting there first. So we'll be launching HBO Go, and actually we've launched HBO Go in the Latin American markets, and in Eastern Europe and in Asia. So yes, I guess the answer is absolutely. It's a tremendous. We think there's a tremendous untapped opportunity there, but it is interesting how once you get in it, it's a little more complicated, and the nuances of each territory and country are obviously a little bit complicated. But absolutely right. When you look at, for example, multi-channel growth, that chart where here we're kind of in decline. I mean, in these markets, it is just booming and growing, especially as kind of a new middle class is established. So that's an interesting rate for sure.
How handy to have you here today. That's great. That's good. Okay, yes, John.
Hi, Shelly. I'm curious as to how you view Netflix and Amazon Prime as competitors to HBO. A lot of what you read that are put out by those two companies, specifically Netflix, I've read things where they don't necessarily consider themselves as an either or, but a complementary service or different service. That you don't have to be you could be a Netflix subscriber and an HBO subscriber. I'm curious as to your thoughts on that.
That's right, and I think,
I mean, not that you can be, but what consumers.
yeah, and I'd say, so yes, HBO, Netflix, we over-index on Netflix homes. I mean, there's definitely a joint correlation between the two. I will tell you, it is really annoying that Netflix always does that, and they are trying to elevate their own brand by mentioning HBO in every comment that they can, and whether it's Reed Hastings doing on earnings calls and that kind of stuff. Because we don't really consider them, I mean, we're very different products. They are, it's funny, they tout, I should say, the industry touts, like Netflix, uses up the most broadband width of any other streaming service. We're not a streaming service. We are a content company that happens to have a streaming service. They're very, very different. We don't measure our success by how many people are streaming Game of Thrones on HBO Go, although obviously good things since we crashed on Sunday night. But they like to make that comparison. It's very smart on their point to do that. And so when we look at, actually, we just saw some consumer research 2 weeks ago that kind of like just threw it all, we're just reminded us, well, the majority of our viewing happens on linear and on demand, majority of it. And when you think about who our customers are at the moment, and we're trying to grow into them, right? We are affluent, as you can imagine, because we're $163, right? We are people who tend to be older. When I say older, it's not just millennials. And so right now, so what we're trying to do is come up with a distribution strategy and a revenue piece that grows with the audience. So if we just suddenly switched everything to HBO Go today and the studio comedy, we would we would cannibalize it. We'd annoy 90% of the people who love HBO for what they are. So we're very mindful. What Netflix has done, unfortunately, and Amazon is going, and now maybe Yahoo, they've driven up the price of content in Hollywood. And so, and that has become probably a bigger issue in terms of what they're using. And so the writers and it's not just a show, the writers and the content creators are, they're shopping everything around. And Netflix has overpaid for content because they're not looking at kind of short-term profits, right? So they're just trying to build a business for, that's going to generate, that they can talk about in the long term. So unfortunately, that's been our biggest challenge, is what they've done to drive up costs on the content side. And that, it only puts then less corporate pressure on us on the revenue side to basically to sustain that. So, but no, we're not, it's annoying, but it's not we don't see them as a big competitor.
Barbara.
So Shelley, what Showtime did in all of this?
Yeah, the top homeland.
We don't even talk about them. It used to be like, oh my gosh, it was HBO and Showtime. They don't even enter the competitive set. And what they did, several years ago, Showtime gave up our number one expenses are studio licensing deals. And that's the one thing the number one reason people come and watch HBO is for the movies. And I think it's great for us to talk about Game of Thrones, it's fantastic because that's the sexy stuff, but the number one reason people come are the movies. We have over 55% of the box office output locked up through 2020. And so that's the expense. So Showtime, they made a very strategic decision a couple years ago to save all their studio licensing and put it into original content. That's very, very risky. And especially now the original content is getting so expensive to make. So they don't have any movies. Homeland was like a big blip for them. But if you can't sustain that and the breadth on an ongoing basis, you're kind of irrelevant. And there's all and what they're really doing, and maybe I'm speaking a little out of school in terms of their P&L. Who negotiates Showtime's deal? CBS. And when they negotiate with the Comcast, if you will, it's the CBS guy that shows up, because what they do, CBS is in there negotiating retransmission consent, right? That's in terms of carriage for CBS. And Showtime becomes part of that deal. And so what they do is they play, they kind of amortize the P&L of Showtime. They kind of mix it all up. So you can't even really look at the revenues, and it could look like Showtime is actually getting more for their service than they really are, because it's been offset maybe on the CBS side and vice versa. So Showtime doesn't even enter the conversation.
Yes, Ellen. There's a mic there, just hit the button to be sure there's a light on.
I know you don't have a crystal ball, but so what happens to the networks 2-3 years from now? What kind of changes do they have to make, given what's going on with the cable landscape?
I don't know, I'm just, like I said, we say every day, thank God I'm not in an ad-supported business. And them, because they have become, like, the retransmission consent has become such a drug for them. Tell you what's kind of interesting, so no one's unhappier about this Comcast merger than Les Moonves. Do you know why? Do you remember last year when Time Warner Cable was in their big fight with CBS? Do you remember that? And Time Warner Cable ended up succumbing and getting, and Les was voting a bit about what he got. Guess what? All that deal goes away once Time Warner Cable becomes Comcast. All that they fought for is now all going to be consumed under whether their Time Warner, who their Comcast deal is. So I don't know. I can't even speculate. And they're not really known for transformation. So I don't really know what they're going to do. But they should be very worried. I mean, luckily, you got like ABC is always going to benefit from being part of ESPN and Disney. And I think that's what you see. My guess is Les is looking for a big company to like partner up with, where you have that kind of leverage. That's what my guess is. That's what he's doing. So I think ABC is fine. NBC, of course, is fine because they're part of Comcast NBCU, right? CBS is the one that should be very worried.
We have a question on the end of the row over here. Yes.
Caroline, I guess, I hope it's okay. That's all right, for a question.
Just be sure the light's on in front of you.
Here we go.
Sorry, Caroline, I actually did the first retransmission consent agreement with Comcast 20 years ago, so I know exactly what it's about. But two questions, quickly. Where is ad-supported cable in all of this? I mean, they've made such a resurgence in original content. It would seem that that would be competitive to the to HBO and other of the pay networks. That's number one. Number two, do you foresee any changes with the spin-off of Time Inc.?
The second question first is no changes other than better P&L, the spin-off of Time Inc. So yeah, nothing there. As far as the question about content, we like to call HBO the network that built AMC. We turned down Mad Men, we turned down Breaking Bad. So yes, we built FX. I mean, the guy that used to run, Peter Lagore is the one that ran FX and brought it to its resurgence of content. Peter was a former HBO guy. So yeah, it's just, there's great content everywhere, right? And so to the degree that that stuff exists, yeah, and I guess we're always competing for eyeballs, right? Which is why, I mean, our content, we just need to be such a differentiator and kind of lead the pack. And yeah, we honestly always like to say, we don't focus on what anybody else is doing. I know that sounds like a platitude, but we really, really don't. We just try to focus on what we do. And the same thing is what we say about Netflix and even with the networks. I will tell you the challenge, though, that the basic networks have. The basic networks don't own their content. So the folks that are producing that content is Warner Brothers Television, Universal, they don't own it. So when they don't own it, it means there isn't much they can do for it after it airs on their linear network. So they don't have this, they don't have a stream. They can't do an HBO Go. We talk to our attorney counterparts all the time because they don't own it. They don't have the rights to it. That's their bigger challenge, is the fact, like the aftermarket. And they can't, DVD sales, none of that stuff is there.
John.
You